Well, hello and welcome back. Today I am working on these little Super Dungeon Explorer Kobolds. And I've got 3 of them, and they're each going to get a different color. And so for these guys, I've chosen Crick's Bane Highlight, Bloodstone, and Celestra Gray as my 3 starting points for them. Now, I'm going to airbrush the base coat on there, and then I think pretty much everything else is going to be brush painting. These are they're pretty small, and they're going to have very similar features outside of their skin tone. So I'm going to do them as a group outside of the skin tone. Now, what I've done already is I've assembled the miniatures. I've attached them to their bases. I've filled the slots that you could still see with green stuff, and I've primered them. Oh, actually, I also cleaned up all the seams. Now, actually, that's something to talk about here. These things are plastic, and they're not styrene. I'm not sure exactly what they are, but it's a weird plastic, and it doesn't take well to knife and file work. So what I ended up using was just some standard 320 grit sandpaper that I had sitting around the shop, and that really just did the trick. After fighting with them for about 10 minutes with the knife and file, I decided to just break out the sandpaper, and I tore it into smaller and smaller bits that I could get into all of the nooks and crannies. When I was all done, it was perfect. So I was very pleased with the results, and I may have to go to the sandpaper in the future for other minis, but so far that seems to be exactly the thing you want to use on these. Something else I'm going to be doing here that I don't normally do is some blackout lining. Now, these models have very shallow detail. It's all there, it's all very cool, but it's quite shallow. So once I get the base coat on, I'm going to end up painting pretty much everything that's not going to be flesh tone. I'm either going to paint it all black, or at least get the edges of it black, because that's going to help define the detail. But we'll get to that in a bit. So for right now, I'm going to go ahead and spray base coats. Oh, hey, before that, I actually I forgot to mention, these guys were all primed with Badger's new Stynylrez surface primer, and I just did a review of that. And so I'm following up that review with some work on minis, so that we can see how it functions in the real world. And so far, what I did here, if you haven't seen my review, let me just fill you in a little bit. This stuff is pretty thick. Definitely not what I would normally associate with an airbrush thinner. So when I did the review, it really didn't want to go through my regular airbrush, which was my Iwata CMB. So I had to break out the old standby, my Iwata Eclipse, in order to spray it. And even then, it felt too thick. So what I did with these guys is I went back to my original CMB, and I thinned the primer with just water. And I thinned it down to a level that's a little bit thicker than I normally like to work with, but still was going to make it through the airbrush. And this is the result. And it covers quite well, and I don't see any kind of difference between when I sprayed it at its full thickness for my review and this. And I'm going to brush paint it onto the bases, because I'm kind of curious how it works as a brush primer. So that's going to be coming up before I do the base coats. And then I'll do the base coats, and we'll show you where that is, and then we'll talk about where I'm going next. I'll see you in a moment. Alright, so this actually took a little bit longer than I expected, because after I got the base colors on, I discovered all the areas that still needed a bit more cleanup. And then I went back in and I did that, and then I added the black in, which didn't really need to do the whole thing, but sometimes it was just easier that way. And at this point, one of the things I'm going to do is I'm going to haze a little highlight on the top edges of these three guys. And then I'm just going to start layering in shadows with a very thin, really going to glaze them in, I suppose, is probably the better way to look at it. But I think in at least the case with this guy, I'll probably be using one of the GW shades, possibly Reichland Flesh shade, maybe that brown one, oh, Agrax Earth shade. And then with these, I will probably be building my glazes with the Liquitex airbrush medium and colors. And if I'm sniffling a lot, it's because we're in full bloom out here in New England, and I get hay fever, and it really sucks. And apparently I didn't start my my allergy pill regimen early enough, so I'm gonna have a couple of days of miserableness. So that's where we are, and I guess it's time to get back to it. And if I can think of a good spot to show you what I'm doing, then I will turn the camera back on and do that. In the meantime, I'll be back in a moment. Alright, so I've already gotten the my glazes on. Let's see, some shadows in here. So there's essentially two stages. There is the darkened base coat, which is really just whatever the base coat color is, plus a little black, except in this case it was Reichland Flesh shade from Citadel. But for the grays, it's a lot easier to just make a dark color with black. And that goes into the recesses in gradual stages. And the idea here is that these guys are the style is both flat and high contrast. And what I mean by that is that there are some shadow areas or elements that get a black line, and some elements that don't. And the ones that don't, the shadows are going to be very subtle. And so that is, you know, in here. I actually did that on the mouth before doing more of a black line in there, and then outlining the teeth, which obviously haven't been painted yet. And then in the eye socket and across the brow and this little plate here. So what you end up with is a look that is very, very smooth, very kind of anime, to go with the chibi look of the minis, but still isn't super flat like as if I just painted them one color. So these are every bit as complex as something that I might paint a little more realistically, but it's very, very subtle. I like the effect. And then I did the back plates and the breast plate in a mix of Citadel Averland Sunset and Mornfang brown, and kind of layered that up a few stages to get it close to the Averland Sunset color. And then I used straight Averland Sunset for the eyeballs, and then those still need to get pupils. So my next step is going to be, actually I think what I may do now is the armor bits and the clothing bits, which have not been painted yet. And then I'll consider the eyes and the weapon and everything else. So I'm going to run off and do that, and I'll be back. Alright, so I've got the armor bits done, just in variations of gray. And same thing with the weapon. It's really sort of a NMM coloration. What else? Oh, well, man, I've been going through and just doing some touch-up on the skin and stuff as I see things that need to get done. But I think next, as I mentioned before, I got to do the clothing bits. And we're getting on close to being completed here. So, oh, the horns. That's what the other thing I did. The horns are essentially just a three-step process. The original black, which you saw on there earlier, the same Crixbane highlight that I used on his skin tone, and then that same color mixed with white for the tips. So they all have that same coloration, and I used that same color for the teeth as well. So they all have similar teeth. So now I'm going to go do clothes, and I'll be back. Well, I'm just about finished up here. I did the clothing. So on the loincloth area, they got a brown similar to his flesh color. So on him, I used like a desert tan. In fact, it's an old desert yellow from Citadel, which is also what I used on their sort of sash. See there on the back. Let's see if get out of the way there. Sash and belt is that same desert tan. And I've been going through and just touching things up and making sure everything's hunky-dory. And, oh, I did the bases. So the base just got like a light gray coating, and then a wash of dark gray and a wash of burnt umber. And that's just drying out now. It's a little glossy because of the airbrush medium. That's what I was thinking. And yeah, so once this stuff dries out, I'm going to give it a nice flat coat, and then I guess I'll take some pictures, and then I'll show you the pictures. So if you hold on just a second, I'll show those to you.